Welcome to the Career Change Diaries podcast with me, Alice Stapleton. And today I'm really pleased to be talking to Joe Mercy Marshall. Hi, Joe. How are you?
Hi Alice, yeah, really well, thank you. Glad it's the end of the week. It's been a long one. You okay?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. Yeah, we're recording this on a Friday, so definitely got that Friday feeling. So Joe and I connected on LinkedIn. He messaged me wanting to share his own career change journey. So really pleased that he's done that and really keen to share his story. So Joe was a aspiring professional musician, which sounds very cool, very glam. So interesting to hear a bit more about that. And he worked all manner of jobs, including hospitality, banking, care work, clinical research, and university lecturing, before finally finding his vocation as an advertising strategist. So lots to unpack there. So first of all, Joe, I guess start with the musician career, perhaps. Tell me a little bit about how you got into that and where the dream came from, maybe.
Sure. I think the term career is probably doing a little bit of heavy lifting, to be fair, when we talk about music. But in terms of where it came from, I always like to write, and I think I always wrote from a young age. And I think at the age of about 13, I picked up a guitar for the first time, and I realised that if you make a bit of noise with this, then it's a bit of a vehicle for your words, and that's very much how I got into songwriting. It's
Mm.
really no more sophisticated than that. So me and my best mate at 14, we told ourselves that that was our path, that was our trajectory. Like it's something that any careers advisor would rightly probably advise against because it's always somewhat of a lottery. But I was 14 and headstrong, and I had my best mate beside me, and we thought, no, we can be the next Nirvana or Libertines or Beatles, depending on who we were listening to that month. So
Mm.
it was very much a kind of like folly ridden, teenage teenage dream, I suppose. But yeah, but we did manage to achieve some good success. We got some good support slots back in the day, when we were in our late teens, early 20s, and we were signed to a very small independent label, and we did, we did well. But then when the band split up, when I was about, I was in my early to mid 20s, still thought that I needed to make good of that promise. We both did, so we started different projects, but it took me until my very late 20s to realize that I was essentially pursuing something that I didn't really want to do anymore. But I told myself that I wasn't a quitter, and I was always born to be a creative. So it took me a long time to realize that sometimes in life you can just become really attached, really wedded to ideas that you don't necessarily hold true anymore.
Yeah. Well, I suppose as it had come to you at such a young age as well, it's hard to let go of that. And what was it that started to change for you that made you think that you didn't want to do it anymore?
Probably the fact that I suppose, the ratio of gratification, satisfaction, and the ability to pay bills and eat was a little bit out of whack. I'd say, it was quite precarious because when I I've listened to your show for a few episodes, and I was always fascinated to understand, like, and to learn about how people have come into to where they are, and and how they talk about the past. For me, I remember saying to you that I was a professional musician slash factotum. Yeah, so I mean, I
Which I didn't
learned.
even know what that meant,
No,
actually.
no,
What
apologies.
does that
No,
mean?
I read. So basically, it's somebody that kind of, it's a worker that just will go from job to job, essentially, from like kind of casual work. The only reason I
Ah.
know it is it is a Charles Bukowski novel called Factotum. It was made into a film. I remember reading it when I was younger, and thinking, yeah, that's kind of a bit like me, but his life's tragic. Mine's cool because I'm a musician. But in reality, yeah, maybe they weren't too dissimilar. His was very hedonistic, though. Mine was never as cool as that. But yeah, I suppose it was going from kind of like, they were jobs, they weren't careers, and that just, I wasn't fulfilling any potential. It was hard to get like the financial stability or really like, yeah, any kind of like satisfaction and like the quality of life that I wanted, essentially.
And were you doing those jobs to sustain the musician career, or just
Yeah,
doing them on their own?
yeah. I mean, yeah, it was very much to sustain music, but in all honesty, by the time I was in my late 20s, the actual amount of, like the number of gigs or like recordings I'd actually do were dwindling, and then I was just left with, just working in jobs that I didn't enjoy and I think that's it. What I truly needed was a vocation rather than something that essentially became a hobby, but I told myself I would never have given up on. And I think a lot of it came down to, to self belief. We could talk about the education system. We could talk about, yeah, just ways that people like not knowing of certain careers when you're young. I think the sociologist Pierre Bourdieu would say, I think I'm pronouncing it right, it was all about kind of like cultural capital and social capital. And growing up, in certain, as like a working class lad from Manchester, I didn't know about jobs in advertising, marketing. All my family works in the public sector, generally speaking. So yeah, and it was kind of, yeah, it was not really something that was available to me. So for me, it was like creative. I was very literal. It's like, well, I've got to be creative in the sense that I pick up a guitar and sing words. So quite naive of me, I think, as well.
Yeah, well, you only know what you know, right? And what's in front of you at the time. So can you remember that definitive moment where you decided to park the musician career?
I don't think that it was one isolated incident.
It's
Yeah,
incremental.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there wasn't a kind of road to Damascus moment where I'd have an epiphany or anything like that. But it was essentially being in my late 20s and like having started 2 degrees that I hadn't finished, because I was just so, like I say, I was just so wedded to the idea of of being a musician. And then it was a case of my like I said, partner, my now wife. I've got married about a month and a half ago. I'm still getting
Oh,
used to that.
congratulations.
Thank you very much. So she was she, I mean, to be fair, she has her own story. She's gone from teacher to very senior art director, so also in advertising. So that's another story. So I'd noticed how well she was doing, how much I admire her and her work, and there was just our quality of life wasn't what I wanted it to be, and wasn't getting the gratification on a daily basis. I wasn't being like, kind of like mentally, and I think, yeah, I just wasn't being like challenged and fulfilled in the way that I wanted to be. So that was when I decided to, go back to uni at the older age, if I was 29, and do it for real this time. And that was that. Yeah.
And so many questions. Don't know where to start. I suppose first of all, what was it like going back to uni at that age? Because I certainly have some clients where there's a bit of a concern about what that will be like.
Yeah, of course. So, ironically, when I first went to uni, I was a little bit old. I'm talking a little. I'm talking 20 rather than 18. Maybe 21. Um, and ironically, I wasn't even alone in being. I was nowhere near the oldest there. But right then, at that time, I felt like. Do you remember? It's a niche reference. Do you remember that Robin Williams films from the 90s called Jack, where it was like an adult stuck in a man's. No, it was like a kid stuck in an adult's body, and he was like 10 years old, but he was a man. I don't know if it.
No,
I
I don't
promise you
think
this.
I saw that
I
one,
promise
but
you, this isn't a fever dream. I have checked this. This wasn't a weird dream that I had. I felt like that when I was younger, and there was actually not really any difference between, like me and the other students. But at 29, I really didn't care because I was driven. But But I suppose that could have been mitigated by the fact that the course I was doing, social policy at the University of Salford, I can't speak, like more fondly of it, and all the staff and the lecturers that have become friends. They also became an employer in the future, but we'll get to that. But like a lot of I wasn't anywhere near the oldest then. A lot of, I'd say even most people on that were mature students. They had lives, they had jobs, things like that. So that really, I was unfazed by it. But I think that even if I was in a situation where I was with some like 19, 20-year-olds, I'd have just had to, just embrace it really, because I was proud of myself in the fact that I'd actually managed to. I was like, right, I'm going back and I'm finally finishing my degree, and I'm, and then I went on to do masters and things after that. So yeah.
So that was you finishing off a degree from before. That wasn't you thinking, right, this is the direction I want to go in.
Yeah.
Okay, so you finished that degree. Were you having thoughts that was a rough direction that you wanted to go in then, career-wise?
So yes. So the interesting thing is, so it was social policy and sociology that I was doing, and I had said, I'd long, said that I'd love to do some kind of, I suppose that the only thing that I ever considered, like apart from music, when I was, like when I was applying for uni, when I was younger and selecting courses, was that that it would be some kind of PR and comms role, like that was what I was thinking. But with the social policy course at Salford, a lot of it was very political science based. A lot of it was to do with like the welfare system, things like that. Absolutely fascinating. So there's a great kind of like social justice element to it that I really, really enjoyed, and I think it was quite defining. But then, of course, there was like the kind of the sociology side of things, and I think that while I was doing it, I was always very much kind of I suppose I was molding it to what I wanted to do in terms of selections of modules and things. And I had an inkling, but I was also very interested in the research, and I did go on to do some clinical research. It wasn't until I was doing my master's degree that I really did have that eureka light bulb moment that I disappointed you before by saying that I didn't have one, but I really do have a kind of fiction worthy light bulb moment for my master's degree.
So tell me about that then. What was that?
So with that, my master's was in international relations and global communications. So at this point, as you can see, the trajectory, I was veering more towards doing some communications thing, but I wanted to keep my options open. I really enjoyed the politics side of things, but I was doing some clinical research for it was essentially a mental health project set up by the University of Manchester, and it was clinical research. So there was basically there was a really nice crossover of the job that I was doing and also of a module that I did during my master's. So the job that I was doing, it was research based, and I was trying to essentially find what I now recognize as insights, and these are the things that spark all great strategy, spark all great advertising campaigns. So it was about trying to get more men and boys in the Greater Manchester area to talk about mental health and to access services. So I was thinking more about like where would we where would we place these ads, things like that, and like who's looking at them. So to give you an example, it was very much putting myself in the side of like, I used to play a lot of football, I used to play a lot of five-a-side football, and you could be frustrated sometimes, like that immediate frustration can be where things manifest. So I was saying that that's a really good place to like capture, attention, like the frustration of the football pitch or like in the toilets after, things can come up for people. So I was thinking this is in terms of a place in, I'm very much shortcutting because I'm aware of time, but it was kind of like understanding like why men weren't using these services, like lots of kind of like socioeconomic kind of like patriarchal reasons. So that was one side of it. On the other side of it, I was doing a live project with an NGO, a Peruvian NGO, and their problem that they had is they were based in, I think it's Huanchaca region of Peru, and they were trying to attract volunteers because they were opening up again after lockdown. because of course they had to close during a lot of the pandemic. So our task was to attract international volunteers to go and like it was like a kind of community centre. Like it was educational, like teaching people how to like cook and things like that. So I was like delving into the research. But before this, like my wife, who works on the kind of like more directly creative side of advertising, was saying to me, you need to work in strategy. You need to be an ad strategist. This is what you should do. Need is probably fair. She'd correct me here. That sounds forceful. She suggested, and at the time I was focused on my job and focused on my course. So I was like, yeah, maybe I'll think about that, but I don't really know what that is. Anyway, I was doing this course with this module with the NGO, and what I identified, I was thinking, right, I was looking at some statistics, and the gender discrepancy is like especially horrible there. Like it was like women and girls, like the disadvantage that they face was just really amplified, even more than like in the kind of Western or Northern Hemisphere. So I was like, right, I want to focus on that. So it's kind of doing research, and it said, well, unfortunately, some of these what women and girls have been through horrible experiences at the hands of men, not going to want to work with men. So it's narrowing it down in terms of demographic of who we want to target, in terms of the volunteers. So all this kind of stuff, and eventually came out with a campaign that and then was rolled out. But it was that I was just buzzing off doing this campaign. I think because there was a social good element to it as well. And I was telling my wife about it, and she went, "Yeah, that's strategy." And I was like, right, now I can see why this would be my bag. And it really was a light bulb moment. And I thought, I've found it. I've found what I want to do for the rest of my life.
And so it was something about having the label for what you were doing that really helped, by the sounds of it. So. Like you were doing it and really enjoying it as part of the masters. Is that right?
Correct.
But then you didn't know that that's what it was called in the working world.
Yeah, and that could be a job, and very specifically because I had done, this won't surprise you, I'm telling you how many different jobs I've had. I did do a little bit of freelance copywriting, like it was for bands. I did some stuff like underfloor heating, some very niche stuff, but I did, because I like to write, so I did a little bit of that on a freelance basis. But I hadn't considered any other role that I could do within advertising. I didn't know this one existed. So it was when my wife told me, and then it kind of came together, and she's like, "This is strategy. People pay you to be a strategist. That is a thing, that feeds advertising campaigns and forms of creative." And yeah, it was kind of like you say, it was like knowing that exists as a job, and I was like, right, wow, well, I want to do that. And like you say though, Alice, like having a name for things can be so powerful, whether positive or negative, can't it? It could be talking about a bad experience somebody's going through. It's like, about 10 years ago, the term gaslighting became popular, for example. And it's kind of, right, we can put our finger on what that type of manipulation is. But and it's like with this, that's a bit of a dark example, but being able to go like, right, it's strategy, I can convey it. It's not just, oh, I like to do research and find these patterns, and then hopefully somebody can take this and do. It's knowing what that is, and I could really like ring fence it and target what I wanted to do.
Yeah. Well, and funnily enough, I do get quite a lot of clients that really like the idea of that exact skill set. Actually, I don't know whether it's just as humans, it's feeding on our curiosity of wanting to dig into something, research something, understand it, but then, as you say, take those insights and use them in a helpful way. So were you quite keen then to do strategy for particular brands or in a particular industry, or were you quite open to start with? Or
I knew then that I wanted to work within advertising, because I think the other thing about COVID was that apart from that it could make or break relationships, and very fortunate that it very much made ours, were you spending a lot of time together working from home. So I was working as my clinical research job and doing my masters, and my wife was on these calls with these like clients in America, all over the world, and she's incredibly talented. And at first I was like, am I being biased? But the longer I've been in the industry, the wonder I realised the more you realise kind of like you can have a professional opinion on stuff. So she's great, and seeing the work that she was doing and her agency were doing really inspired me. And I was like, right, I want to be there. That's what I want to be doing. It's definitely advertising. So I was very fortunate in that when I finished my masters, the project that I was doing, the mental health clinical research project, came to an end just because it was only I think an 18-month contract, and I was actually offered the opportunity to go back to the University of Salford, where I'd completed my undergrad, to do some lecturing on research methods module and sociology.
Okay.
So that was amazing. But I said to them, I'd love to do this. And I think that if I'd been 10 years younger and the whole professional, the academic sphere wasn't so precarious, there's so much short-termism, like 0-hour contracts or fixed-term contracts. If it hadn't been for that, I probably would have followed my lecturer's urgencies and done a PhD. But being in this situation, I'd be like, for what? I'd be so, financially hard up for so long. I'd already decided what I wanted to do. So I said to them, I'd be honoured to do some teaching, but just to let you know, I am trying to get into the advertising industry. But because they kind of like needed hourly paid lecturers, this kind of worked for them. So it was mutually very beneficial. It was quite a nice symbiotic relationship we had. So then when I did actually find that job, that first junior job in advertising, I was able to, just give them a month's notice, and then I started my new journey.
So with the lecturing, did you go back to them and ask them about that, or was that a connection that you'd stayed in touch with who asked you? Or
they asked me to do it because I did very well in the research modules, which then obviously I was able to apply at getting my first job in advertising, which was research executive, which is the kind of the first rung on the strategy level ladder, I suppose. But yeah, I'd stayed in contact with my lecturers, because I think that's one thing about going to university at an older age. You kind of like make connections more with, I'm not just some kid who wants to get drunk. Like they weren't. Some of them weren't that much older than me. The ones that I stayed friends with. So my friend, who's fantastic academic, she and just a lovely person. She just asked me if I wanted to do it, and I was like, wow, I'm blown away. I'd love to do that.
Okay, that's cool. Okay, so you decide you want to go into advertising strategy. So what did you do at that point? I mean, I suppose you've got your partner who can give you a bit of advice and knows the inside track, but talk me through what steps you took to get into that first role.
So you're right, Alice, and I think this is a very important thing to say, and I'm sure it's something that you bang the drum of very kind of like vehemently about networking. You've just got to show up, you've got to do that, and also connections. The thing is me and my wife have both come from backgrounds where we didn't have like an auntie or uncle or like family friend in the industry, nothing like that. As my family were like nurses. My wife's were like, like plumbers and just kind of like hotel receptionists. We didn't have that. We didn't know of this world. So all the connections were through my wife rather than from family, and she had to build them herself. So I was kind of piggybacking off her a little bit. So it was good to be able to get advice. I was able to speak to a strategist on her team, a wonderful strategist called Mel Daggett, who's still at Havas Links in Manchester. And we spoke for about 10 minutes, and she said, this is for you, like we've got similar brains. So we did that. But in terms of but there weren't any direct leads, so I basically just moved into LinkedIn. That became my home, essentially. Went to a lot of networking events. Wrote to people speculatively, showed them examples of the work that I had done at university, any freelance copywriting I'd done. Just kind of, I think I put a couple of decks together about, similar to what Rebecca said in a previous episode. I did similar things like that, but the opportunity I really found came about in quite a funny way. So I was off for the day because it wasn't every day in the week that I was lecturing, and I went to a careers fair. So I took off my teaching hat from the University of Salford and put on my graduate hat from Manchester Metropolitan Uni, and I attended a postgrad fair because I'd not long finished my postgrad, so I was entitled to go to them. And that was where I met who then became my first agency, my first employer, who's now my friend Nicola, who I'm meeting up with next week. We remain good friends, but she was there, and it was kind of like a speed dating event, but for networking. You had 5 minutes. You were sat on a table with other, graduates, and then these employers would come round, and kind of speak to you for 5 minutes. And I stayed in touch with Nick, and I wrote to them, sent them a CV, and they eventually created a position for me, which I'm so lucky for. They didn't have a live position, but they created one for me. So speculatively applying is just, like, it's worked really well for me. But the really nice thing about that is I had a wonderful experience in my first agency, and the second one, to be fair. But what was really nice was a real 360 moment for me, because a year later I then attended as a delegate to that same careers fair to meet potential graduates there. So it was a really nice 360 moment. But I was so lucky, I was so privileged to be given that opportunity.
Yeah, definitely. And when you approached them speculatively, did you say, I'd love to come in as a research executive, or was it them that said, we love what you have to offer and this is where you start? Or
that's a really good question. No, that's a great question. It was a bit of both, I think.
Right.
So I had networked with people, and I'd LinkedIn can get a bad rap, because some people do say ridiculous things on there, like, I got married and this is what it taught me about B2B sales. People can be very, ridiculous and not very self-aware and hyperbolic, but there are some, I think that it's like anything, isn't it? It's a tool, and you can see the very best, you can really see the very best of humanity. And I met some fantastic people on there, junior strategists who were not long graduated, and then some that had been in the game a bit longer, and then more senior strategists. And so many people just gave me some advice, and I'm just so indebted to them, so grateful to them. I'm still in touch with them now. So they'd kind of told me about this trajectory, that you could come in as a research executive, or it could be this, or there also been suggestion, because of my experience with research and because I'd taught it, and because of my age and other experiences, I might come in at a more senior level than, graduate. But yeah, so I suppose it was a bit of both. But I wrote to my former agency, my first ad job, Barrett Dixon Bell, BDB. Got to give them the plug there, because they're the wonderful, wonderful people. And I wrote to them kind of like with some examples of stuff that I'd done, what I really liked about what they'd done, why I think we'd be well aligned. And yeah, they called me in for an interview and then set me a task. And the role that we decided, they said they think that research executive is kind of most suitable, because that's where most of my experience was.
Yeah. So I'm making assumptions as what you do in that role, but talk me through what you do as a research executive.
So it really was very, as you can imagine, very research heavy. That was it was essentially a lot of desk research that would then feed into strategies that my manager would lead on. But we put together. So to give you some examples, we would, because a lot of the agencies within, a lot of the clients that the BDB have, they specialize in nutraceuticals and pharmaceuticals. So, for example, they would be looking to, they'd be looking like to put together a campaign about that would tie in with the Olympics, for example. So they'd be like, right, how are we going to sell these ingredients to companies that kind of want to advertise around the time of the Olympics? So I would then I'd do a lot of qualitative and quantitative research from my desk. I'd kind of understand the kind of the kind of consumers that would like go to like Olympic events and would engage with this kind of thing, and then in terms of their consumption habits of health products, like whether it be like probiotic yogurts or capsules, anything like that. It can, and then it would just kind of like really drill in to do that. And I'd be the one. My old manager used this fantastic analogy. She, my old manager Minka, she's from South Africa. Her garden was her back garden was Table Mountain essentially. And I think her brother was a botanist, and he would essentially, the analogy she uses, he'd go out and discover all these species of flowers, and then somebody else would like look at them under a microscope. And it was kind of like that. I would go out and I would just gather all of this research, and then together we would like really filter down and see what it was, the insight, that kind of like human truth that would really unlock what the kind of the direction of that campaign would be. So yeah.
And how much do you see of that campaign after that, from that level? Do you continue to be involved, or is it, the door closes when you pass over your research?
It's a really good question. I think in general, at a general level, that can happen. But I've been lucky about the agencies that I've worked at, where we very truly are very much integrated, and you see it through. So of course there are different skill sets. So say for example, like I've done all this research, then myself and my manager would sit down, and then we'd kind of like distill it, like find like potential strategic routes, and then of course we'd sit with creative, but then it would into an execution level, like there would be like website and like SEO considerations, like from a digital perspective, and then there might be some PR, there might be at industry events and things like that. But the great thing about truly integrated industries, ones that really, because a lot of agencies say they're fully integrated, but like I've heard that some of them, it can be a sliding scale, but the ones I've worked at, you really do kind of like, you are really in it together, and you'll celebrate that. There'll be like updates with the work, and then like when like it's been rolled out and the client's really happy with it, and we've got feedback, and obviously in the best scenario we win awards for it. It very much is kind of like, we celebrate this together, and we've seen the process, and you're very invested in it, because the thing with strategy, it's like top of the funnel. There's that analogy about gathering something, pouring it into this kind of like process, so you can see everybody's fingerprints on it essentially. And so it's nice to be close to it. In good agencies, you are always quite close to it.
And I think you said that you got promoted quite quickly in those first couple of years. So what does the path look like when that happens in that space?
So I mean, I went to a different agency. And they were, so that was a step up. So that was a junior planner role. Now, this is, so to be confusing, Alice, but the terms planner and strategist are used quite interchangeably in advertising. So it was known as a strategy trajectory, but it was officially junior planner. So that was a couple of steps up, because generally you'll have research executive, senior research executive, and junior planner. But it was the right move for me, because I wanted to experience some more consumer-facing stuff, and kind of like just explore different industries rather than just the nutraceutical and pharma kind of stuff. So I worked on things like energy drinks and like Energizer batteries. I did some stuff with Oracle Red Bull racing team. It was very different. It's getting that rich experience. But the opportunity came up there. So so I knew that I was ready for it, without tooting my own horn. I don't know why I say that as a marketer. I should be very much in favour of doing that, and I am. Yeah. But I knew I was ready for it, and I was very sad to leave where I want. But I suppose that's the other side of coming to a career late and being laser focused on it. Really, it is kind of really just kind of, you're not messing around. You're just really kind of like driven when you really know what's what. But the downside of that, I
Yeah.
suppose, is you might have to leave that first agency, that that first job, sooner than you would like if it isn't ticking every box for you, which is
Mm.
rough in the smooth.
And you said there about being late to a profession. So were you quite a bit older than most people at your level?
I mean, for the benefit of your viewers, I think it's quite obvious that I'm not 22, because I know that, of course, I don't know, you will show this video. No,
You'll have to
so
check
I
out the
was.
YouTube version to see
Yeah,
that.
absolutely. You see, here we go. There's a plug. See what I did there. Yeah, we'll get more. We'll get more views on the YouTube channel, Alex.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So I was older. So I mean, it can depend. I mean, if we're looking at the kind of like typical go to uni at 18 trajectory, if that's your path, you graduate at like 21, 22, you say you do a master's, you might be 23, 24. I was 33. So I was, at least 9 years older than a lot
Mm.
of people. More typically, I'm generalizing that. I very much am generalizing. But for a kind of entry level role, I was older than most people in entry level roles would be.
I
Yeah.
imagine that was an advantage though, right? You had all that experience, maturity.
I thought so.
Mm.
Yeah. But it's interesting because people would say, like you. It's interesting because people would say, "Oh, like you mature," and I was like, "No, I'm just old. I'm just old, and I moisturize, and maybe I don't look as old as I'm. Not that I regard that as old, but I mean compared to the 22-year-olds.
Yeah.
But then equally, I would say, I learned so much from the people who were like in a different role to me, but like account executives who were about 23. I was in awe of them, and I still am. Like I think there's just so much intergenerational learning that can be done when we kind of like there's no condescension and people just talk to each other and learn from each other and be collaborative. And I was in awe, and I still am a lot of like the younger colleagues. I was like, how are you this mature and like professional at 23? I was like, I was an idiot when I was 23. I lived for the weekend. I think I was working in banking when I was 23. I was in a call center, and I was doing that, and it was the money wasn't bad, but it was all about going out, and it was music. I wasn't really interested in the work I was doing. It wasn't like a fulfilling profession. So yeah, so it was an advantage. It was an advantage definitely, but of course also there's in comparison to a lot of the people that a lot of my friends and kind of that are my age, and certainly so my wife, there was kind of I'd be earning a lot less than them, but that's you've got to start somewhere, haven't you?
Yeah, that was going to be my next question because yeah, I suppose entry level job.
Mm-hmm.
What did you say? You were
33.
32, 33.
30, yeah, it might have been 32.
So
Yeah, 32, 33.
how did you manage that? Or maybe it was okay because I don't know, musician life and the various bits and pieces that you were doing, you were kind of used to it. I don't know.
I would say I suppose there were it was we it was difficult. It was definitely difficult, but my luckily my partner, I see I'm doing it again. My wife,
Well,
she was like a lot. She is a lot further along in her career in terms of like time spent and seniority. So of course that was an advantage, but also I'd always had to be kind of good with money because I hadn't had much of it. So I was always
mm,
had to be good with it. I wasn't that, like I said, I was a boring wannabe rock star. I wasn't like really hedonistic. I saved money and like watching EastEnders. I was quite boring, so I was always quite good with money. And the other thing I did is I had a little bit of a side hustle, selling football shirts as well. So there was that, and I
all
was had
right. Yeah.
so yeah, so I had to kind of be quite like resourceful and entrepreneurial. But yeah, it was difficult, don't get me wrong, but it's the more I can progress, obviously the easy that is. But the thing is you've got to be in the right job. It's got to be fulfilling. Like you could be earning like a lot more a lot sooner, but it wouldn't be right for you and it wouldn't be nourishing. So I'm at the right level, I think, in terms of kind of like that balance. Obviously, it's always nice to earn more money, and hopefully, as I progress, that will be the case. But yeah, it was definitely difficult. But the longer you kind of persevere with it and stick with it, the easier it gets, because the more money you should earn.
Yeah, yeah. And are you a level above that junior planner now? What level have
Yes.
you got to? Okay.
Yeah, so I'm now a strategist. So should we say it's a fourth rung? I suppose it depends on which ladder you're looking at, but the ones that are most strategists use, and I kind of like was introduced to. Yeah, so I'd be at that level now. So yeah, so I've climbed 3 rungs in just over 2.5 years now. So I'm very fortunate, with the opportunities I've had, the great people that I've worked with. And yeah, and I think that, like, with that's obviously more responsibility, and also just kind of like leading on just so many projects. Like, I worked under a fantastic manager at my second agency, and yeah, a lot of what I did, I just kind of like went, yeah, I just like went off and did it, and managed to lead on some big brand and campaign strategies.
And what sorts of clients or brands have you really enjoyed working for? Because I know, like, when you were talking about the NGO stuff, it sounded like you quite like the sort of, you know, doing all of that for good or whatever. But yeah, what would be like your ideal brand to be, or client company to be working for?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, it's really interesting. So there was, by the way, Alice, I'm an absolute nerd, and I've got a memory like Rain Man for certain things that stick with me. There was like Howard Gossage, one of the original one of the ad people. He was I can't remember the verbatim quote, but it was something. So I'm contradicting myself here. But he said something like, "Advertising only truly fulfills its purpose when it does social good," which was very progressive for like a man in the 60s to say, really.
Mm,
So I mean, but the whole kind of like the whole purpose thing, it's a big debate that's controversial within advertising. But for me personally, I'm very transparent about, like, yes, if you can improve people's lives, then that's fantastic. But products can do that. Products
yeah, yeah.
really can do that, even if there's no kind of like kind of like societal gain. Like, products can do that. You could be talking about like like sanitation, as like you could be talking about anything. You could be talking about like water bottles, like, and it is all about these emotional benefits, because it's not essentially ever products that are being sold, it's the value add, it's the kind of like like the idea or the improvements to their lives that are being sold. So on one hand, I have some of the most interesting things I've worked on have been on the surface seemingly not that interesting. So for example, I've worked on, like, I've sold tins of paint, and it's like really understanding the kind of getting into the minds of these independent traders that are feeling, all of the kind of macroeconomic and then like industry specific precarity, and people tightening the purse strings, and they're wanting to get their hands on like paint that will kind of like be reliable for them, and also do well by the people they work for, they're the customers. So it's funny often, where you can find real human stories. And I think another good example, I worked for a company that did wayfinding signs. And it's kind of like this whole thing about like navigation, exploring life. But yeah, sorry, I am answering the question long way around here. But yeah, in terms of where I'd love to work, I mean, it really does depend, because I've worked with some big brands, like Energizer batteries, like partnership with Oracle Red Bull. There's been some, and then more consumer things like energy drinks. But I think it's not really about like the brand so much. It's about the brief, and it's about like
Mm,
the
mm.
message, and it's about like what the freedom that we've got as creative advertisers. So, but yeah, I mean, like, I would love to work with organizations like football clubs, any kind of community projects. I'd love to work with some charities. I'd love to work for the likes of Crisis one day. But I think that it is like I alluded to before. It really is what you make of it. I think you can make great work out of anything, providing the collaboration's there and you're all on the same page, really.
Yeah, it sounds like you just enjoy the challenge, enjoy the process of it all. So, okay. Um, so finishing off, I suppose when you reflect back over the career change that you've made, what would you say have been like the highs and lows?
So I suppose the highs is waking up every morning and being able to look back at that. It sounds quite sentimental, but look back at that, like, young person who just didn't think that there was anything but, music for them. And I was always working hard to, just to eat and pay the bills, looking back and kind of like just seeing that, like, I've got such a great purpose now. And obviously highs, of course, are getting that great, like feedback, being nominated for awards, like working with just so many lovely people, like coming together, and just that's definitely the high. And just being at the heart of making, like good communication and making like really exciting creative, they're all highs. There are too many highs. In terms of the lows, I'd be lying if I said that that working in Adland can't be stressful, because of course it can, but anything that's worth having comes with a price, right?
Okay, and if you had to offer any advice to somebody out there, maybe not enjoying what they're doing, a bit on the fence as to whether they make a career change, what would your advice be?
It would be, see, I need to be careful here because I understand that I speak from a position of privilege in that I was in, a stable relationship. There were like two earners and stuff. So of course, people have different priorities. So it would be reckless of me to say just go for it. It really would.
Yeah.
But if it's available to you and to feel that like the risk wouldn't be catastrophic if it, kind of like went, if it went wrong, then I would definitely say, don't ever live with regret. It's failure. I'd say that failure is fine, in terms of as itself and the consequences of failure. Like I said, I'm trying to be very careful here. Obviously what I'm saying is, say, for example, somebody's working a job that they hate. I'm not saying quit your job and go and try and do whatever. You've got to obviously do it in a way that works for you, that is sustainable and realistic. But in terms of trying something and failing, providing that you're doing it, like with a safety net, whether that be a job or whatever, I'd say that, yeah, that was something I live by. It's fine to fail. I've failed,
Can I ask what
yeah,
do you see as failure in that circumstance?
trying something and maybe not achieving it. And that's okay, because there's so much that we learn from it. I mean, how could you learn anything from not, not failing? Like, so say for example, like, well, I mean, suppose with me, I wanted to be a professional musician and I didn't, and that's okay, because I just kind of like learn so much about myself. I know people that have tried to start their own business, and maybe it was a business that wasn't, like right for them. Maybe it was no reflection of them, but like what they managed to kind of take from that and, and channel into what they love and what they've done since, it really is priceless. So I think that the failure thing was something that, would maybe held me back a bit subconsciously, because you could always fall back on the excuse of, oh, I want to be a professional musician, so that's why I'm not pushing to, get like a career that's an alternative. But I think a lot of it, probably when I was in my early 20s, I was scared of failing. But then as you get older and your appetite for exploration gets more and you just want to be fulfilled, then you become less afraid of that. And you've got to go through a lot of pain, like in terms of, like, yeah, putting yourself in situations where you're the oldest in the room, but but the least experience. Some embarrassment is the price. Not that you should be embarrassed by that, but like the discomfort, should I say, is like the price that you often pay for progress, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And what does it matter in the grand scheme of things? As you say, if you're the oldest person in the room, no one cares.
No.
I'm not sure, I'm sure they're not all spending their days thinking about you being the oldest in the room. As you say, it might feel uncomfortable for the first 5 minutes or something, but yeah, what's more uncomfortable is staying in a career that you don't enjoy just for the sake of avoiding that little moment of discomfort, maybe. But yeah, I get what you're
Absolutely.
saying. You can't just sort of recklessly say, oh yeah, I highly recommend that you change career, because everyone's financial situation is different. But I think it's having a plan, and it being a sustainable plan, and a
Yeah,
financial transition that you're comfortable with, whatever your circumstances. So,
definitely.
okay. Well, it's been so nice talking to you, Joe. And you've said that you're very happy for people to reach out to you on LinkedIn.
Yes, I am.
And who knows, maybe there's people out there that can help you find your next role, perhaps. And if anyone wants to connect with me as well, obviously do that on LinkedIn, or you can find me on Instagram. And do check out my website, alicestapleton.com, if you're thinking about your own career change and want some help with that. So yeah, just thank you again, Joe, and wish you all the best.
Thank
And
you.
yeah,
Yeah,
thank you very much.
it's been great. Thanks for having me on. Thank you.
You're very welcome.